I still remember the way my phone slipped from my hand the moment I read the email, the one saying my brother had already sold my father's house, signed the deed, and taken every last dollar. And the worst part? He'd done it in my name too. Before all of this, before betrayal turned my stomach into a knot that never fully loosens anymore, I used to think of myself as a quiet, steady person. Someone who found comfort in small routines, in the soft rituals of everyday life. I grew up in a small American suburb just outside Nashville, where the summer nights smelled like barbecues and cut grass, and the cicadas hummed so loudly you felt the sound in your bones. I used to walk home from work as the sky turned pink behind the rows of identical houses, thinking my life wasn't perfect but at least it was peaceful. I was the kind of woman who did everything by the book. Bills paid early, car serviced on time, never missed a shift, never made trouble. My father used to call me the steady one, the child who didn't break things, literal or emotional. He said it with pride. I never realized until after he died that steady one was also another way of saying the one everyone leans on until she collapses. My brother, Tyler, was the opposite, loud, chaotic, charming in the way that made strangers love him and family dread the next phone call. He'd been that way since we were kids. While I stayed home with homework spread across the kitchen table, he'd sneak out to ride with boys who always smelled like gasoline and trouble, coming home with stories that made Dad rub his temples. Even when we became adults, nothing changed. If anything, the world rewarded him for it. He floated from job to job, always between opportunities, always borrowing things he never returned. But Mom adored him. She called him my baby, even when he was 31 and asking her to co-sign loans he never paid. I learned to make myself smaller, quieter, more efficient, just to keep the household from tilting off its axis. It never mattered how much I did. Tyler always took more space, more time, more oxygen, and somehow expected me to applaud him for it. Looking back, the signs were everywhere. Tyler didn't just take the house. He had been chipping away at my trust for years, subtly, methodically, like a thief testing locks until one finally gave way. He would borrow money to fix his car, only to vanish for weeks without paying a cent back. He'd promise to help around the house, then disappear for nights on end, leaving me to clean up both literal and emotional messes. Even the smallest favors became transactions. I'd cook his favorite meal, he'd criticize the seasoning. I'd drive him to interviews, he'd arrive late and blame me for not telling him earlier. Every slight, every deception, every whispered excuse had piled up in the back of my mind, a quiet, gnawing pressure that I ignored because, somehow, I loved him despite it. And yet, every time he smiled and said, "You're the best sister anyone could have," I felt my own self-worth twist into knots. I'd internalize the blame for his failures as if his poor choices were my own, carrying them like a backpack stuffed with stones. That stone-heavy burden was my daily life, and I didn't know I was already preparing the ground for a betrayal that would feel seismic when it finally struck. After Dad passed, I threw myself into restoring his house, the one place that had always been my sanctuary. I spent endless weekends sanding floors, painting walls, replacing broken windows, and restoring that old oak tree in the backyard. The tree Dad had carved our initials into when I was 9. Every nail I hammered, every brush stroke, every shovelful of soil felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that could not be stolen. I worked nights at the diner, mornings at the hardware store, saving every penny so the house could become mine in the truest sense, not just legally, but emotionally. It wasn't just a building, it was a monument to my independence, my dedication, and my right to exist without being overshadowed by Tyler's chaos. I had found pride in something that was completely mine, and for the first time in years, I felt like my efforts were acknowledged, not by him, not by Mom, but by me. The house became my armor, my statement that despite everything, I could hold on to something meaningful, something permanent. But the reality of our family's dynamics meant that no victory could last long without the threat of betrayal lurking somewhere nearby. And that threat was about to arrive in a way I could never have anticipated. Tyler's behavior shifted subtly over the weeks before I discovered the truth. He started asking more questions about the house, how much I had spent, what repairs were left, which furniture was staying, and he always had a grin that made my stomach twist. Sometimes he would be unusually helpful, offering to carry paint cans or sweep the porch, but there was something too calculated in the way he lingered, watching my reactions. He'd compliment my work excessively, and then disappear for hours, leaving me alone with a lingering sense of unease. Little things, like missing documents on the counter or unexpected phone calls from strangers asking about Dad's estate, made my pulse quicken, but I ignored them, convincing myself it was paranoia. Still, each minor alarm sounded louder than the last, like the soft warning hum of a storm approaching on the horizon. I told myself I was imagining it, that Tyler was just finally appreciating the effort I put into the house. But deep down, an almost animal instinct whispered that the moment of reckoning was closer than I dared to imagine. Every time I turned around, I half expected to see him smiling, already plotting the move that would finally shatter my world. I remember the exact moment it hit me, though at first it felt like a dull ache that wouldn't fully form into reality. Tyler came over one morning, carrying a set of papers and an envelope with that familiar official seal. He smiled that crooked, charming grin I had learned to mistrust, and said, "Hey, I thought you'd want to see this." My hands froze mid-motion as I took the envelope, the paper trembling beneath my fingers. I tried to laugh it off, tried to convince myself it was another one of his ridiculous schemes, but the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. He watched me with a patience that was almost cruel, as if he knew the damage the words on that paper would do before I even read them. The ink bled like a betrayal across every line, and suddenly, the house I had poured years of sweat and late nights into was no longer mine. It was gone, sold out from under me, signed with my name, by my own brother. My mind went blank. I couldn't process how someone could erase not only years of work but also my trust in one calm, deliberate move. Every memory of building the house, every night I spent worrying over floors or paint colors, all of it felt like ash slipping through my fingers, leaving nothing behind but disbelief and a burning, hollow rage. Tyler watched me crumble. He didn't speak at first, letting my silence fill the room like an accusing shadow. Then he leaned back against the doorway, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "It's not a big deal," he said lightly, as if announcing the weather. "I just had to make some decisions for both of us." The words hit me like a fist to the gut. "Decisions?" I croaked, voice shaking, trying to keep tears from spilling. "You sold everything, without asking me. You used my name, my savings, our family's history." He shrugged, almost bored. "Family helps family," he said, in the same tone he always used when dismissing my feelings. "You'll thank me later." The casual cruelty of his words, the absence of remorse, made my vision blur. I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my ears as rage mixed with disbelief, grief, and betrayal. I wanted to scream, throw things, shatter every piece of furniture I had worked so hard to fix. Instead, I sat down, hands clenching into fists, jaw tight, silently recording every infraction in my mind. That day, a line was drawn. I understood clearly that Tyler had no respect for boundaries, for my effort, or for the truth. And I realized, in a cold, piercing way, that this was not just a mistake, it was a declaration of war. For the rest of the day, I wandered through the house, touching walls, floors, and the kitchen counters, searching for something familiar, something unchanged. But every surface whispered betrayal. The air smelled faintly of paint thinner and dust, remnants of all the nights I had spent restoring this home, now tainted by his actions. My phone buzzed endlessly, messages from friends, inquiries from lawyers, even a text from Mom that read, "I know he's upset, but you'll understand eventually." But I couldn't understand, not yet. I curled up in the living room, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory, every early warning, every tiny incident I had dismissed. It wasn't just the house, it was every time he had used my trust, every time I had assumed family meant loyalty, every night I had quietly hoped he would change. The hours stretched like an eternity. Anger and grief collided in a raw storm of emotion, leaving me shaking, exhausted, and painfully aware of how alone I had become. By the time the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky with the same colors I had imagined for my life here, I knew that nothing would ever feel the same again, and that I had a choice to make: remain a victim or fight back. I spent the next few days in quiet, relentless planning. Every decision Tyler had made, every word he had used to gaslight me, became a piece of a strategy I meticulously built in my mind. I created spreadsheets tracking every dollar he had touched, every phone call, every transaction he had attempted to hide. I documented everything: photographs, bank statements, even recordings of conversations where he had subtly belittled me or made claims about helping the family. My apartment became my war room, cluttered with papers, sticky notes on the walls, and a whiteboard with timelines and contingencies. Friends noticed the change. I smiled less, but my eyes burned with purpose. I walked through the city streets at night, imagining each move Tyler would make next, anticipating the panic that would rise when he realized the tables were about to turn. I reread every interaction we had, parsing for the tiniest inconsistencies, the cracks in his confidence, and I realized that the same patience I had used to build my life could now be applied to dismantling his. By the time I fell asleep, exhausted but determined, I knew that revenge wasn't about cruelty. It was about reclaiming power and protecting the dignity I had almost lost forever. The storm was coming, and this time, I would control it. When Tyler finally called, I didn't pick up. 17 missed calls blinked on my phone, each one a desperate attempt to reclaim the control he had always taken for granted. But the evidence I had gathered was ready. I sent carefully worded messages to banks, lawyers, and family members detailing every manipulation, every hidden transfer, every lie he had told over the years. Suddenly, the confident grin he had always worn faltered. Emails bounced back, phone calls went unanswered, and I could feel him sensing the shift in power. He didn't realize I had become untouchable, not through force, but through preparation, precision, and a refusal to allow my trust to be weaponized again. When he finally confronted me in person, the panic in his eyes was unmistakable. He stammered, his usual charm evaporating under the weight of accountability. I remained calm, measured, holding the boundaries I had drawn long ago. And in that moment, I understood something vital. The person who had been weak and exhausted for so long now had the upper hand, and it felt incredible. Tyler's loss of control was not a moment of triumph for cruelty. It was a cathartic release, a reclamation of life and dignity that he had tried to suffocate for far too long. The confrontation was long and tense. Tyler tried every tactic he knew: charm, guilt, anger, tears. But I had rehearsed my lines in my head 1,000 times, anticipating every deflection, every attempt to manipulate me into submission. "Do you understand how much damage you've caused?" I asked, my voice steady though my heart raced. He tried to minimize it, to turn it into a story of family helping family, but I wasn't swayed. I spoke calmly, detailing every lie, every betrayal, and every moment I had sacrificed for him without recognition. For hours, we went back and forth, the room charged with tension so thick I could feel it in my lungs. He shouted, I paused, he begged, I stood firm. And with every word, I could feel a piece of the past loosening, the chains of guilt and silence finally breaking. I wasn't yelling for revenge, I was speaking for myself, for every sleepless night, every disappointment, every ounce of my heart that had been ignored. By the end, Tyler slumped in his chair, exhausted, frustrated, and finally seeing me, not as someone to manipulate, but as a human being with boundaries, resilience, and unshakable strength. The day I left was quiet, almost anticlimactic, yet it carried the weight of everything I had endured. I packed my essentials with deliberate slowness, making sure every box, every piece of clothing, every small object held only what mattered to me. I paused at the threshold of the house one last time, feeling the floorboards beneath my feet, the faint scent of paint and sawdust lingering like ghosts of all the nights I had sacrificed. Tyler lingered in the background, watching, perhaps expecting an outburst, a pleading, a tearful collapse. But there was none. I walked out with steady steps, carrying the sense of release that only comes when someone finally refuses to be trapped by betrayal. Every sound of the door clicking shut behind me echoed like a declaration. My life was mine again. I didn't look back, not once, though I felt the weight of all the past years pressing against my chest. Each step away from the house, from Tyler, from the manipulation and lies, felt like shedding an old skin. And in that quiet, deliberate act of leaving, I realized that true strength was not in revenge alone. It was in choosing yourself, even when it meant leaving behind pieces of your heart. Months later, my life had taken on a rhythm that felt almost foreign after years of chaos. I had rented a small apartment overlooking a quiet street lined with autumn trees, their leaves painting the sidewalks in gold and crimson. Mornings were calm. I brewed coffee slowly, watched the sunlight spill across my kitchen table, and listened to the city waking up in distant, comforting hums. Work at the Chronicle had become more than just a job. It was a purpose, a reminder that I could thrive on my own terms. The house, Tyler, and all the betrayal felt like a dream I had finally woken from. Friends visited often, laughter and conversation filling spaces that had once been hollow with fear and resentment. On rare occasions, I thought of Tyler, but the thoughts were fleeting, replaced quickly with the satisfaction of knowing that I had reclaimed my life. I had learned that peace wasn't about forgetting. It was about constructing a reality where betrayal no longer dictated my worth or my days. And in those quiet, unhurried mornings, I discovered a clarity I had never known. I didn't need anyone to validate my life. I had built it for myself, brick by brick, tear by tear, and it was enough. The knock at the door came unexpectedly on a rainy afternoon, the kind where the sky presses down and streets glisten with the reflection of neon signs. I opened it to find Tyler standing there, rain dripping from his hair, eyes wide as if he had finally realized the gravity of his choices. He attempted to apologize, to explain, to charm, but the words were hollow against the years of manipulation and betrayal. I listened, calmly, and then stepped aside. "It's too late," I said, my voice steady but kind, offering no more chances, no more foothold in my life. He lingered for a moment, as if hoping my resolve would falter, but I had learned that closure wasn't about anger, it was about boundaries. When I closed the door, the rain continued to fall, cleansing the street of the past and marking a definitive end. I stood at the window, watching the droplets slide down the glass, realizing that my heart no longer throbbed with fear or hope for someone who had consistently betrayed me. The silence was not empty, it was liberating. And for the first time in years, I understood fully that some stories don't need reconciliation to reach their proper ending. My life, my choices, and my peace were mine, and no one could take them away again.